Hello and welcome back to the dotCMS Content Contributor course. In this video, we're going to talk about push publishing. Now, throughout this course, we have been publishing content directly from the server that we're working on to that same server. All of the content exists there, both in a working state and in a live production state. So, we're doing everything in one place. Now, this may be how your environment is set up, depending on your organization's needs. However, it is a common best practice to instead isolate those two environments, a working or dev environment and a live or production environment. Isolating these two environments ensures that our content won't be accidentally published and seen by our end users before it's ready. Instead, it would have to pass some form of user acceptance testing or QA before it could ever go to our live or production environment. Push publishing is essentially the action of taking that content, once it's ready, from the development environment to the production environment. So, rather than just publishing that content ourselves, oftentimes someone else with a higher level of authority will be push publishing that content for us. Or that content will first go through some form of UAT, user acceptance testing, or QA, quality assurance, to make sure the content is ready before they can sign off with an approval and then allow us to push publish the content ourselves. Now, there are multiple ways of doing this, and it totally depends on your organization's workflow. But I am an administrator on this account. So on this server, I can do essentially everything I need to do just to show you what this looks like. Again, as a content contributor, you may not be able to push publish yourself, and that's okay. But understanding exactly how this works is still extremely helpful. So let's take a look at some content and exactly what push publishing looks like when we're ready to get into it. Now here I am on my dev environment, or my working environment. This is where I would be working on the content, and then when it's ready to go live, I would push publish it to the other environment on a different server. Let's go check out some of our content here. I'm going to look at blogs. Now the blogs that I have here, I have set up a special workflow to use push publishing. So some content might be published directly and some content may be push published. Again, this entirely depends on your workflow. So let's take a look at 5 snow sports to try this winter. Once I'm here, I can lock this for editing. And now we see our available actions. Instead of publish, I see save and push publish. If I click this button, it will actually pop up with an entirely different menu. Now, it won't always do this. Depending on how we have set up push publishing, it may just go ahead and publish for us using some predetermined settings. But in this case, it does allow us to make some choices ourselves. Here we can see multiple options at the top. It's important to follow along from the top to the bottom to understand exactly what's happening. It says, I want to push, remove, or push remove. If we want to push content, we want to take it from development and push it to our production server. If we wanted to remove content, we would have content that is already currently pushed to our production server, and we'd want to remove it from that server. If we push remove, then we do both. Now we see that we can push content, and we see some publishing dates and expire dates. We can set a date for this content to be pushed and published. The good thing about this is we can set it for the future. This can be extremely helpful for automating our workflow. Think of it this way. If we've written an article and we want to make sure that it gets posted at 6 a.m., but we don't necessarily want to be up and at work at 6 a.m., well, then we can set our publishing date for the day we want to post it at 6 a.m. And then at that time, it will be published automatically. Of course, we also may want to just publish content while we're actually working on other things, rather than having to stop everything we're doing to be ready to publish that content in real time. So we can set these dates ahead of time, both publishing dates and expire dates. Now, only the publish date is relevant for pushing. We want to send content from our development server to our production server. But it's never going to expire using this action. It will stay there indefinitely until we send a remove action. In this case, we only set an expire date. And again, we can set this in the future, so that at a certain point, we can remove it when the content is no longer relevant. Sending a remove will essentially just remove the content from our live production server. Finally, we have a push remove. And the push remove allows us to set both of these dates at the same time. If we know that we're going to have content that will only live for a certain period of time, we can set our publish date and expire date as soon as we're ready to publish it. Then it will live only for that period of time, and then it will be removed. Do note that we can also set our time zone, and this is based on the time zone of the server, so be aware of this. We also need to choose what server we're pushing to. In the case of only having a single server to push to, this won't be an issue, but you may have multiple servers that you need to push to. Some servers might only be for certain types of content or for certain time zones or regions, so keep that in mind as well. Finally, you may notice I skipped over a part here, and that's our filter. You'll see we have a number of different options under the filter. Content and relationships, content assets and pages, everything and dependencies, force push everything, and only selected items. The default filter here is actually everything and dependencies. And this will include everything and any dependencies, meaning everything that this content might need to be published appropriately. This is usually the go-to option for that reason. It ensures that we're not going to have an issue displaying the content. However, there are cases where you may want to choose one of the other options. Content and relationships will only include those things, the content itself and the relationships. Everything else behind those will not be included. However, it will include dependencies and relationships. Content, assets, and pages will again include those things, as well as any dependencies. Everything and dependencies we already covered. Force push everything will push everything related to that content. The content itself, the page, the relationships, the dependencies, everything. And if that content already exists on our production server, then it's going to push it again anyway and replace it with this version. Finally, only selected items. This will only push exactly what we have chosen. It won't include any of the dependencies or anything else, but just this content. Obviously, this might get a little tricky, and like I mentioned before, sometimes you don't even need to worry about making these selections yourself. You can simply click Push Publish, and it will go ahead and handle it for you. But in case you do see this menu, just remember, the default and most common choice is everything and dependencies. This ensures that everything gets pushed. There are some cases for the other options, but again, if you'd like to learn more about these, I strongly recommend that you check out our documentation site. For now, I'll choose everything in dependencies. Then we can click Send. It'll save the content, send it for publishing, and it's now sent off to our other server. You'll see that it's been published, and it's good to go. Something important to understand about push publishing is there is a publishing queue. Once we choose to push something, it is added to the queue. We can check this queue by going to our site and then publishing queue. Here we can see the bundle ID, the name, the title, the contentlets involved, and the status, whenever it was pushed, and if there's any issues with it. The good thing is we can choose to retry this at any time. So here we can see the status of our pushing, and once it's done, then we'd be able to see it on our production server. I do want to point out though, like I said before, there are multiple ways to push content. Yes, we can push it from the content itself while editing it using our workflow actions. But we can also use, say, our content search. If I'm looking at blogs, I could select multiple items, choose available workflow actions in the top right, and choose push publish, as long as that content has a workflow that uses push publishing. Then I get my exact same screen, and I can choose to push it from there. Finally, we can also push publish using the site browser. If I go to my site and browser, I can actually choose to push any of the content I see within my folder structure, including folders themselves. This can be really helpful if we have an entire folder of content we've created and want it all to be published at one time. So we could organize it here in the site browser, and then we could go ahead and choose to push publish from the site browser. If I right click on the blog folder, I could choose push publish, and now I can go ahead and push it. The good thing about using the site browser is it doesn't necessarily require us to have the workflow set up to do it this way. As long as we have push publishing set up, then we should be able to push publish using the site browser. So hopefully this explains the benefits of push publishing, how to push publish, and the many ways to push publish. Again, I strongly recommend you check out our documentation site if you have any questions at all.